Going here
Okay.
shortly. All right, are we recording? Yes, we are. Well, this is week 7 of session 2 for the Portal Zero to Hero program. Today we have uh, the Captain American of Portals, Jim Novak, once again. He's teaching us all of the secrets of the liquid language. So, without further ado, Jim, it's all yours. I stole 3 minutes of your time. Please forgive me for that.
No worries. Let me share here, and hopefully the demo gods will be with us again. Things went pretty well last time. Um, Let me share. I will bring up my screen, and once again, hopefully nothing embarrassing is showing for everybody. Um, and just bring up some slides real quick. And yeah, we're going to talk about liquid templates, a little bit more advanced class. I have another presentation I did that was more of an introduction, and it was kind of the mechanics of it. So we'll assume you have some background on it. We'll get into some more advanced topics. As I always say, feel free to chime in. This is a pretty fun crowd, and lots of interaction is good. I much prefer conversations than me talking at people. Like to hear about experiences, poke holes in my presentation. If anything you see is wrong or you get a better idea, always open to hearing it. This is some work I've done based on my experiences over the years. So it's by no means 100%, all the things you can do, but it's just some stuff that I'd learned over the years. Wanted to share a little bit about me, just some links and stuff. That's my picture, um, and real quick into the agenda. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit fast. Jump in at any time. Don't worry. You're not going to hurt my feelings with interrupting. You got a question or a comment, jump in. But I'm going to try to boil this down to 45 minutes, and hopefully we'll get in some look at some cool demos and stuff. We have the agenda. We're going to look at liquid template language recap. We're going to skip that, like I just mentioned, and we'll jump right into working with data collections. Pretty key element to liquid templates and PowerApps portals is working with data, because a lot of times driving why you choose liquid in the first place is you have data you want to display that you have a limitation on, just the out of the box configuration. So look at some of those tools you have in the language. And we'll jump right into another key one that is, again, if you're familiar with Dynamics over the years, Power Platform, Common Data Service, which is now Dataverse. You've probably used Fetch XML. It's used throughout the platform, and you can use it in your portal too for a way of getting complex queries and pulling back data for your portal. Web templates as a service is the next thing we're going to discuss, and that's something I'm stealing from Colin Vermander, another guru in the portal world. And he had a very nice article about it that I've used in a couple different places, where you have to serve up data to external sources, or even within your portal. I just want to grab some data for use in, say, a script block. You can serve up REST endpoints using web templates. It's pretty cool. Not real complicated either. That's the nice thing about it. You're just configuring things a little bit differently to serve up the data. And then we'll talk about how to reuse stuff. We have all these cool mechanisms to serve up data, manipulate our pages and all that. But how do we make sure we're not just going to be copying and pasting our code over the place? And there's a tag called include, that is a pretty powerful tool. And then we'll look at some other mechanisms for extending our templates. You've got this really cool layout, or you've got a really cool structure, or even a bit of logic you want to reuse. We can extend it with a couple of different language structures that we can talk about there as well. And then how do we tie it all together? How do we, how do we use all these things to build our complex pages? So that's a real quick agenda. Let me jump right into it. Working with data collections, as we talked about. Again, I know I'm talking real fast, so please feel free to interrupt me if you got any questions. Victor, I can't see the screen, so pop in if anybody raises their hand. Um, the data collections, again, a lot of times when you first choose, why am I going to use Liquid in a page? Past projects, whenever I first got into portals, I didn't even know what Liquid was, and we wanted to serve up like a left-hand index of a bunch of data that wasn't easily configurable. So we jumped into Liquid, and we started looking at how to grab the data back from the system and serve it up. The Liquid language offers two different types of objects for dealing with data, and they're very similar, but there's some distinct reasons for using one versus the other. And one's called an array and the other one's called a dictionary. They're just lists of items. So when I'm in Liquid and I'm iterating on items, we're iterating on lists of data. And the array allows us to access data in a loop, but also by index, by position. Give me item number 7 in my array. A dictionary is like an array, And honestly, I think you can access it by position in a dictionary too. I'm not real sure. It may only see it as a key, but the key difference is a key. You can access an item in a dictionary by unique identifier. A key value pair is a way to think about it. And that's pretty nice. So I get a list of items back, say they're records from the system. Um, and I want to go and iterate on them in a loop, but I also want to grab like the first item in an array. Our example there with an entity list views, I'm going to get the first one in the list with the views and an index of 0. But up above, you can see I can iterate on it as well and just spit out data. The distinction here with the dictionary and the next example we see on the right-hand side is we can access an item by ID. And a typical example, these both come right out of the documentation. So I'm totally plagiarizing the website, the documentation site, docs.microsoft.com, is I have a series of request parameters. And typically I'm going to a page, I'm navigating to a record, and they give me in the parameters in the URL, they'll give me the ID of the record I'm looking at. I can grab that from the request object and the parameters dictionary items and get the ID of the record we're talking about. And then I can also look at the dictionary or array itself and look at some properties on it. For example, we've got size. How many items are in the array? Why loop on an array if I don't have any items in it? So I can do a little bit of logic to save myself some processing on the server whenever I'm doing my liquids. So in this a simple example, if I don't have any items in the array, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to say, put out a message, or in this case, I'm going to tell if I do have items. And the other structure you or construct you get with your dictionary and array is another object called a for loop. And it can tell you where you are when you're iterating on a loop. And that's really powerful. And we'll look at an example in a later section where we see a use of a for loop. I'm iterating on a collection and I want to have a comma for the last, or don't put a comment for the last item. For example, I know about the loop that I'm in, and it's pretty nice whenever you're writing some complex code. And then there's some other filters that you can apply for your arrays where you can batch things. If I'm iterating over things, I can group them up in batches of 3, for example. And I'll show you the card template that I use where I say only give me batches of 3 so I can do a new row for each of these batches. And a group by is obviously what it sounds like. I can group things by certain properties or attribute values. And that's a pretty nice thing you can do on an array before you iterate on things. In your liquid, you can process the array or dictionary before you start spitting it out. So that was a real quick overview of data collections. Next up is fetch XML. And I didn't show an example because we'll look at one with fetch that actually shows dictionaries and arrays. Because fetch XML is a structure that we're all familiar with, it's a way of querying data from CDS, or sorry, now Dataverse. I should update my slides. And what it will return is I'm going to read it here, the next to the last item. It returns an object that contains a list of entity records. So there's our list, which is an array, and then a dictionary of attribute values for each record. So it should be something we're familiar with. I query records out of my Dataverse database, whether it's Dynamics or just Power Platform, and I want to look at the list of rows, right? Think of the grid, and then I want to iterate on the attributes within, the values for that row. Those are the columns in our grid if we're looking at it in a user interface. So fetch XML is a way of using a fetch query to bring back an array of items with a dictionary of attribute properties. So we'll look at an example here. We're jumping here in a moment. The cool thing about fetch is it allows us to do complex joins that we can't necessarily easily do in some other out-of-the-box configurable items. But more importantly, it allows us to parameterize things. So if I need to say I only want to bring back records for the current logged in user, I can put a parameter in and filter by the user ID. Or I want to say only bring back related records for the record we're on. We'll look at an example. Then I can easily go in and do that with a parameter in my fetch XML. So I can use attributes and values. Like remember the previous slide, we had a request parameter, give me the identifier. What record am I on? We can pull that into our fetch query. The other cool thing is, and that's where the link entities and aliases are supported. I can join on different items and bring back complex queries. The other cool thing about fetch is the entity permissions are applied. And what do I mean by that is this isn't a backdoor, right? This isn't a way of cheating and going and getting data from Dataverse and our Power Platform by just, well, let me just put a fetch query in and go get me all the social security numbers for all the people in the system. Your entity permissions are applied as if you're doing a configurable option, right? So if I put up an entity list on the screen, entity permissions are applied to that. Same entity permissions are applied to your fetch XML queries. So it's really nice. It applies all of that permission filtering before it ever returns the data, just like it would be if it's a configurable option. So again, this isn't a way to cheat, it's a way of expanding on what you couldn't normally do in configuration. And just as a note, almost every time I put fetch together, I've forgotten to put in any permissions and it doesn't bring back values. It just returns nothing. Really annoying. So always check your entity permissions whenever you put a new fetch query in. So again, that was real quick, talking about data collections, how to get data out of the system or how to work with data out of the system, and then using fetch to bring the data back as well. Let me open up a demo real quick. I'm going to open this up. I forgot to have it open before I started. I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. And what I'm going to show you is not this. Let me open up the appropriate folder. What I have is I've exported. There's a tool in Fetch Fetch. There's a tool in XROM Toolbox that allows you to look at your liquid templates and edit them in line. It's called a script editor, and it's really, really nice. But the other cool feature about it is you can actually export that out to disk. And I'm trying to find it. Apologies, I should have had it up before I started, but I am opening it up here and select folder. There we go. So what I have is I have a big export of a portal that I've been working on over the years, and I have a whole bunch of stuff that I exported. And these are records right out of CDS, Dataverse, and they're web templates. So this is just an export of what I'm seeing in my system. Just working with it offline. It gives me a way of not having to, things auto update and whatnot. If I don't want to save it, I don't have to save it. So what I want to look at real quick is I'm going to look at this liquid template that I have right here. And let me zoom in. I think it's Control Plus. Yeah, there we go. So I have this is an export, and I'll show you in a moment where this lives in the system, but it's a web template. So I'm going to assume you're familiar with web templates, and it's just a chunk of liquid code. And all I do in this is I have a couple of fetch statements, and I have a few of them in a row. And the fetch syntax, they've just updated this over a few months ago. Well, it might be 6 months ago at this point. They used to be pretty sparse documentation on this. Now it's done really well on the Microsoft documentation site. But what I do with fetch is I have a tag called fetch, and I put in one parameter, and it's the variable name that I want to put the results of the fetch query into. So basically what I'm saying with a statement is run this fetch XML down in here and fill in the values into this object called session. And the fetch you can see isn't very, very complex. The website that I have, this portal that I built, was for managing events. It's called PowerApps, series of events we've been doing for a little while. And I built a portal to manage the events. And what I have is I have an event with a start date and an end date. And then within the event, I have a series of sessions with speakers. And that's what I'm getting a query on for. I'm running a query on here is I'm going to get the details for a session. And what I'm doing is running a series of fetch statements. And first one is, here's the base details of the record. And it was just, I have a whole hierarchy of different data elements that I'm pulling together. And what I did was I just put them all into a series of statements, populating a couple of values. And I'm getting a little bit ahead of the slides. Up here, you can see this assigned variable, I'm going back a slide, I should say. And I have, should look familiar. We just saw this a moment ago. I'm going to go get my request params value for the identifier of the record that I'm on. And I'm going to go grab details about it. And where I use that is down here. And this is where I talk about parameterizing your fetch. It's kind of cool. Give me only the details for this one session. And I use that throughout. You can see the filter criteria is the same for each, but it's a very simple idea, and you can do much more complex queries here or filtering in your queries. But in this case, it allows me to use fetch, do a join on some stuff, do linked entities, and grab a bunch of them all at one time. And the reason I'm doing this is in the configurable world, it wasn't the best use of, I didn't have the ability to configure it the way I wanted to configure it. So that's why I jumped over here. But I have a series of fetch statements where I'm populating a session details. And then for that session, give me the list of speakers. And you can see I've got a couple of link entities there, and they're going to go into an alias called session. And then photo, I'm going to bring back some details about the web file associated with it. But they're all keyed off of the session filter. And then I've got a series of tags. It's a very simple custom table. I'm going to get my terms correct. Custom table called tags that allows me to categorize things, and then a series of links for the session. What are some links that the speaker might want to share some slides with? So basically, I have one liquid template here that populates a series of values, a series of objects with the results of fetch queries. And what it looks like, where this is used. So this is great. What do I do with this? Another page and session details page where I use that. So now here's where I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. I'm jumping ahead to the magic include statement. So what I'm doing with the include, and we'll talk about it a little bit more detail, is I'm saying run that fetch, run those series of fetch statements, and then I'm going to look at the results here. So we'll get into that a little more detail, but you can also see how the collections are populated and how they're used. So I want to get the individual session. I'm just rewriting the variable there into a session. And what I've got from the result of that fetch is here's the object I was talking about, and it's got a collection. Here's the list of values coming back, the results. There's some more information on the results, but I've got a list of entities. And here you notice I'm doing it by position. So it's an array. So I've got a list, and I'm counting on it being one because I said, give me only the session details for this session, a unique ID, so you should only bring back one. So I'm accessing it by position. And then the tag groups, you can see the tags is the other variable I populated. Same convention. I've got an attribute called results, and I've got a list of entities, and it might be more than one. And here's where I'm applying that tag group by. This allows me then when I iterate on this, I know that the groups will be in order and group and clump together if I've got multiple groups that are the same. And then just a comment here, because I always try to do best practices and comment my work. But now I'm just building a page, and I'm going to use the variables that have just been populated by this series of fetch statements. And I'm going to grab the, off of my object, which is now a session entity, right? I've got a populated entity filled in with the values from the table, and I've got the name variable there, or name value there. I've also got a subtitle, and I'll show you what this looks like in a moment. But here's an example of, I've got a collection of attributes that I can get by name, right? So I can get by identifier. So this is a dictionary. This is a list of items that is a dictionary, and I'm going to get the attribute value back and get the name value off of the track ID. So there's an example of how you get the data out of the session, the series of attributes, and the shortcut here is I can say attributes, I believe, but it's going to give me the value of the PowerApp track ID attribute. Is it a column? I think it's called in Dataverse now, and give me the name. And this should look familiar. This is very similar to what we would do with an entity in C# code or JavaScript code. Very, very similar stuff. So that's a nice thing. It's familiar to us. It's just being populated by the liquid template. And here I'm just popping it into a row, and this is bootstrap stuff coming right out of the stuff that comes out of the box of the portal. So I'm just doing a couple of rows. And down here, I'm going through and grabbing the description off of the session, and I'm doing some additional escaping and converting new lines to breaks so that it's displayable in HTML, and then strip new lines just to make it clean when I'm debugging. And you can see I'm just going through and I'm iterating on the speaker results. This I'm just doing a straight up for loop, and I'm populating the speaker information, grabbing the speaker public profile copy. This is, I believe, a contact is what I'm actually retrieving in this case. There we go. We got a contact, and I've got another include statement. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm basically just constructing a page off of the session information. And let me show you what it looks like, because it's always a little bit easier to see it in action as opposed to just in code. So here's the event site that I've been talking about. And this is 365 PowerUp. This is a portal. I've customized the look and feel, and this is a static page. But if I go to the events page, I've got a list of events that are in the past, because things have kind of shut down on events for a little bit. But this is all liquid as well, where I have a couple of events. I just have a custom liquid page for this. But let's drive into the details, and I can show you where that's coming up. I've got another template for this. Pardon me 1 second. I'm going to close my door. Got the family in the background. So I've got this is another example of a custom template. We'll look at this a little bit later as well. And all the way down, where am I getting the session details? I've got a button over here that I've populated. This is all, again, liquid as well on the page. Here's the card templates I was talking about. So you can do some cool things. But those details are rendering this. So all of that stuff, I went in and queried one session, all the related information. Here are the tags. Here's the title. Here's the main tag. Here's the description with the escaping. You can see new lines and breaks and whatnot in there. Here are the speakers, the contacts. I've got their profile URL. Here's a list of links that we looked at. So all of that, I was able to have one template that I rendered, or sorry, retrieved using fetch, populated some variables, and then I rendered them into a page, and then I use them within this. I have some JavaScript behind the scenes in my base page, and I pop it up on screen here. So all of that allows me to put everything in one place for the queries, then reuse them. We'll look at where we're using it again in another place. But this is where I'm able to use Liquid to bring back data about one record and then a whole bunch of associated stuff and display it however I please. I could display this any way I like, but I use some of the out of the box. This is I think it was pill is the style here, and I'm using the out of the box modal for Bootstrap. So it's kind of a nice way of grabbing data and giving you the flexibility of rendering it however you like. So far, any questions? Like I said, I know I've been talking very, very fast, but feel free to jump in. Some of you who were here before, if you got other questions from last time, feel free to jump in as well. Let me grab my slides. I'm looking back between my screens. I know I'm all over the place. Fetch XML we just looked at. So web templates as a service. This is a really cool feature, and as I mentioned, some of you might be familiar with it because Colin is pretty well known. He is one of the gurus who I go to. He had a nice post about this. What if I want to serve up data as a REST endpoint? What if I want to have my JavaScript call into my portal and just grab some data for manipulation? Or again, what if I want to send off these sessions? You want to consume data from my portal that's all public, right? That session information, you'd like to go and render it on your screen, bring it into an event feed or something like that, an event calendar, for example. There's a way of doing that. So I can use the same queries, use the same web templates and all that, but all I have to do is configure it a little bit, a very specific way, and I can open it up as a service. And right now, the REST API, the web API, pardon me, the web API for portals doesn't offer up just querying data. They say rely on Liquid because it's already there. It just does the other CRUD operations. CRUD without an R, CUD operations. And but we can use web templates to serve up JSON instead of it being a web API call. And the way to do it is basically you have a web template and an associated page template that you create to run whatever query you like. And on that web template, what you want to do is spit back data. As opposed to being HTML like I had, I want to bring back data. It could be a CSV, it could be XML, it could be JSON as we're seeing here. It could be any format you like, but these are common ones. And you set the MIME type on your web template. And I'll show you how this is configured in a moment. But this is what tells anybody who's consuming it that you're getting JSON or XML. The page would be associated with a page template. And when you set up your page, what you do is you disable the header and footer on it. And again, I'll show you this in a moment, but disabling the header and footer says, whenever I go load this page, don't inject all the other stuff, literally the header and footer that's configured in your portal, so that it doesn't inject all the script and all the other HTML that gets rendered. It just gives you the raw result of your web template. And the MIME type will say, I'm going to give you this raw data, whether it's JSON or XML. And then the next bit is just load that page from a URL, just like you would do a REST endpoint, passing in whatever parameters you need. So what does this look like? Again, very, very straightforward to configure on this. Let me open up the portal, and that is not what I wanted to click on. I wanted to go over here, open up my page. Should have had this open before. Once again, we have to see pages loading, apologies. But make sure I'm in the right environment. There we go. And I will open up the portals configuration. If you've worked with portals before, you're very familiar with this, the portals model-driven app. And I want to go look at a web template. Let's just start with a web template that serves up data. And what we'll look at is the session details JSON. So this is what I could do. Let me just bring this up and show you. Here's an alternative method for serving up that JSON for what we just showed in a page. What I could do is I can give the data alone out to somebody if they want to say, I want to show your sessions in my website to advertise for you, or if you just want to consume it and I want to put it on my portal to make sure I get credit for my session, instead of spitting out the HTML that we saw on this other page, and I believe it's over here, right? So instead of rendering all this HTML, I just want to give you the data representation behind what we're looking at. So I have a web template that does just that. And it's a little bit easier to read in this case because you're not looking at all the HTML. You're just, but I'm going to call the same fetch, bring back the data. So this is one reason for the include. Again, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I don't have to redo the fetch. I can reuse it, have the same queries used in 2 different places. Now I'm using it in this template, doing the same logic here, grabbing the tags, grabbing the session. And instead of rendering HTML, I'm rendering JSON. And I'm just plugging in the data that I'm getting back from the session. And I have a child list of speakers, right? That's what this attribute is. You can see it's an array. A little bit harder to see there, but that's an array is what I'm starting. And then I bring back my categories. As I said, we have a group and then the individual tags, and I iterate on that. And then I have a list of links, and that's the data behind this page. So all that data that I have rendered here, you can render it however you like, or I can render it differently in multiple different places. So here's an example of what it would look like, and here's how it's being called. So I have this session as a service page set up, and it spits out the JSON representation of what we're looking at on our page. And I can render it exactly like this using JavaScript or some other template, but this allows me to serve this up to whoever wants it. And how is that configured? Let me go see if I can show you how that looks. What I want to do is I started out with a web template and I want to back up to the configuration we're talking about. Let me show you real quick first. Here's the MIME type that I mentioned. So it's all the way down below the web template content, and it's just a string put in application JSON so that I know when I'm getting it, what type of data I'm getting. That server is going to serve all that stuff up. If I back up one level, I'm going to go to the page templates associated with this. Page session details, sorry, the page template is PowerApps session details JSON. And this, I think my slide's a little bit off. This is where I disable the header and footer. So typically with a page that I'm serving up in a portal, you want the header and footer so that all the cool stuff displays. So if I look at my page here, that is what renders all of this stuff, and anything down at the bottom, all of this stuff is the header and footer. And that's defined in your portal. Again, if you're familiar with portals, you're probably familiar with that. Turn that off. We don't want that served up with our page. We only want the raw results of this web template. And then I back up to the page that's associated with it. I should only have one. And then this is where I get in fact, I didn't have to drill into it. I've got my URL that I'm calling. So this is how I call it. And the parameter expects is an ID. So it's kind of cool that I can pass in this ID. And as I mentioned in the template, first thing I do is grab that identifier, pass that into my fetch query, parameterize my fetch. And then here's the URL that I call. And I can call this from JavaScript. And I can use this, again, in a page. I can use it in another service. I can do whatever I like with this. And if I was using it in JavaScript from a page, I would just use an AJAX call. If I'm doing it in code, I can do it in C# code. I can do whatever I want. Just invoke this and get back the results as raw JSON. So that's a really neat feature for multi-purpose use of your data. Serve it up to other people, or even within your site, you can have multiple ways of rendering the same information. So that's some cool stuff. And again, that one is, I totally give Colin Vermander credit for this one because he explained it very, very well. And I have a link to this in the end of the slides. So we're down to 15 minutes. We're doing good. I'll keep talking fast, but once again, feel free to jump in. Now we see includes. So we've seen it a couple of times, and effectively what includes does is says, I got this other web template, use it here like Lego blocks. I heard somebody explain it that way, and it works really well. I can build a web template using other web templates, just like I'm using functions in C# code or JavaScript or whatever other language you're using. But basically, I always think it is like the old school. I think it was C++, use macros, where it's basically glom together chunks of code. So effectively, when we looked at the include before, you saw the include on the beginning where I said use the same fetch. Here's an example where you'll see it throughout. This is used throughout the out-of-the-box portals. If I say include page copy in this example right here, effectively what it does is anything that uses that, it'll inject this. This is the content of the page copy web template. Very simple. It's going to inject that code and execute it as if it's part of the web template calling it. So it basically allows you, again, to kind of Lego block together different templates. And it's really neat because you just saw one example where I had 2 different ways of rendering the same data, but I keep the source of the data the same. So if I change how I want the source of the data to say filter or sort, I can do that in my source information, or I can let the, keep that the same and then do, order it or display it any which way I like. So the reason it's nice is, again, that query is in one place. I reuse it in multiple places. I fix it once, I fix it everywhere, just like regular code. We're back to, I'm writing in JavaScript or C# or C++ or Ruby or whatever, reduce errors. The one thing, and you can call it directly or you can pass parameters. Here's an example down at the bottom here where I can pass in a parameter to say that whenever I execute this web template, I can say do something different based on a parameter, just like a function. And in fact, we can use web templates like functions, and it's a little bit. There's some caveats to it. It's very cool, very powerful, but you have to remember what you're doing in terms of scope. So I say scope over here. Scope is important because the variables defined inside the template can be accessible from outside the template. And we saw that in the previous example. I populated some variables. In fact, the first one was called session. And then once I executed that web template with the include statement, I can use it. I can also overwrite it, which is the first thing I did. So that's something to keep in mind. You can overwrite variables from within and without. So you have to remember your scope. So whenever you want to use includes, just make sure your naming convention is pretty well defined. Again, it's a convention as much as a standard. You can't really protect yourself from it. It's kind of like JavaScript used to have global variables for everything. So that's where namespaces and classes came in, all that fun stuff. So it's important, and you can use them as functions. That's where I have the flexible templates here. I'll show you an example here in a moment where you can literally say, I want to call this template and have it spit out a value that I use later. And let me just pull up the example here real quick, because it's a really neat feature that I kind of stumbled upon when I ran into a problem. One of the things I had to do in the portal, and I'll show you where it's used in a moment, is I had to compare dates. And out of the box, the date comparison didn't work for me when I was doing a variable of type date time and comparing a variable of another type date time. Which one is greater? So I found a blog post, and I cannot find it for the life of me. I'd like to give him credit, but the blog post who wrote this said, we'll convert it to a number. So take the date time, convert it to a number, then you can do a mathematical comparison, compare two integers. So I'm like, that's really cool. So all I did was I put this into a web template. There's just more comments than the code. It's actually just a really neat bit of code, but I put, like I said, there's probably more comments than there actually is work being done. But what I do is I have an input parameter, and I'll show you in a moment where this comes from. So I pass in a date. I want to take a date and convert it to a numeric value that I can use in comparison. So I pass it in, and this is this date to convert. Where does this come from? It's passed in on the calling template. And we'll look at that in a moment. And I assign it to a variable so that I'm not going to worry about overwriting it. And then I basically go through and again, or where I got this from, I'm stealing this. And I will find out who gave me the information because I want to give them credit. Basically, I'm going to convert it to a number. So I'm going to go through a series of steps, look at the values of the individual parts. So I'm going to get the month, get the day, and then check whether it's greater or less than 10. So I can pad it with zeros. So they make sure that it's in a common format with leading zeros. That's all this really does. And then what I'm going to do is assign it to a variable called datasInt. And it's kind of collapsed like this because I was trying to reduce space whenever I was debugging. I was kind of reducing white space when I was debugging. But the end result of this web template is the output value of called datasInt. So if I invoke this, I pass in a value of date to convert, and I get an output value of datasInt. Unfortunately, you don't have call a template and have it set it into a variable. I set it in the template, and then I access it after the fact. And that is on, let me look at the event details, and I'll show you where it's being used. The event details community, event details template. Am I in the right one? Yes, do as int, there we go. So here's where I'm calling that web template that we were looking at before. And let me zoom in a little bit more. So date to convert is what we were looking at a moment ago. I'm going to do the include statement. Power update is integer, and that's what we were looking at a moment ago. The input value, that date to convert, was passed in, and I'm doing now. And that's a liquid construct of saying, give me the current date and time on the server, and passes that in and runs the content of the template. And this is the equivalent of injecting the content of that web template, doing the work, and then then immediately all I'm doing is I'm grabbing the resulting value. So this is my use it as a function. And I'm glad I left my camera on because I'm doing air quotes. So I'm invoking this with an input value as if it's, say, let's JavaScript or C#, and I'm setting the resulting value as the date is end. So I'm going to grab that immediately, and that's important because the next time I call it, let me see if I can find the next one. I'm going to call it again down here with a value from my event. And this value, date is int, will get overwritten with the next time it's called. So that's where scope is important. But all I have to do is make sure I capture it. I did date now, I think is what it was called. What did I call it? Now date. And then now I call it down here and I call it call for speaker date. So tell me when the call for speakers is done. And then here's where I use it. This is what I'm doing it for. All that work. I have this really nice reusable template. I invoke it and I have a convention for calling it. Make sure I immediately capture the output value because it's going to be overwritten the next time it's called. But now I can compare dates. So kind of it was very useful in my instance. Wasn't very complicated, but it was a really nice use of web templates. And like I said, I'm really glad I stumbled across this guy's work because it saved me a bunch of pain in figuring this date stuff out. So now basically what I'm doing in this liquid is I'm saying, if the call for speaker date is expired, show this, or sorry, hasn't been expired, show the link for it, right? So I'm just injecting a link. Otherwise, tell them it's ended. So a web template that I have all that code in there, and it's again, it's not super complex, but I don't want to have this copied and pasted everywhere. And I just want to have, just give me the date value, give me the numeric value of this date. So this chunk of code right here, minus the comments, is called multiple times, but I keep it in one place. If I have a problem with it, I fix it once and everywhere else gets fixed. So it's kind of cool. So that's a really neat example of how to use includes more than just, blocking together different, you can use them as functions. Blocking different components of your site, you can use it as a function. So let me get on with this real quick. Extending templates, we talked about includes as one method for extending where I can reuse things across different places. I can parameterize it, conditionally change the functionality of a web template. But if I have an entire page structure that I want to keep, it's kind of like the old school ASP.NET master pages, if I got that right, where I want to have, a content area that I overwrite, everything else will remain the same. So I've got this template for a page and I only want to overwrite sections. You can do that in Liquid. You can do it with a block and extends. They're kind of tied at the hip. So first thing I do in a web template is I define a block that I want to be kind of standard functionality. This block is common data that I'm going to render on my page, and I can have as many of those as I like. There might be a limit, but I don't know what it is. And practically speaking, I would be amazed if somebody can break the limit of it. But I basically just, and a common example would be a page of header, footer, and then main, right? A simple example of segmenting my page. And then where I use that, because if I just render that web template on its own, it's going to render just as a read stop the bottom. Where it comes into play with the extends is what I do is I say, okay, I like the layout of that, but I want to override this bit over here. And I only want to override that. I want everything to remain the same. So again, header and footer of like 10 different pages, and all I want to do is override the middle. I would extend that web template, and the only thing in my child or my derived template, if you're doing like inheritance and programming languages, I could extend it. The only thing I'm going to have in that child or that derived web template is the bit that I want to override. So I'd leave header and footer alone and only override the block. And it's a really nice way of standardizing layout. You can even standardize functionality. I had an example I was doing with leveraging kind of a custom navigation outside instead of using web forms, and I was using the block and extends to only override certain sections, keeping like the navigation the same. But I have a simpler example I'll show you here in a moment. And then, by the way, this is used heavily throughout the pages you'll see in the default portals. You see block and extends all over the place. And I have an example that I used in this PowerApps portal, and we looked at, in fact, let me show you the page first. We have the event page we were looking at. So I have this event page, and I'm kind of proud of it. It's pretty cool. It's a pretty complex web page. We were just looking at the call for speaker dates and all that fun stuff, and that's being rendered over here. The links. I have some custom CSS that has a background image based on the event. So I have this configured. All of this comes from a series of records in my CDS database, an event and all the related stuff. I've got the speakers. I've got all the sessions. We already looked at that. But down below I have the keynote. I've got all these different rooms, the different sessions. This is bootstrap tables and stuff. I've got another view of them by track. So I brought all this data back for my event and its sessions, and I use the data in two different ways. That's another example of includes. In one place, I'm going to render it as by schedule. And the next place, I'm going to render it by room, right? Location. So same data, same type of template when I get to this list, but I just use the data twice. And then I got all this stuff in, are all of these amazing speakers. Some of them might look familiar. This was Tampa 2 years ago. And, I have some templates for this. And this is all cool. I got all the sponsors, all this stuff. And I've got Beth down here, who is the coordinator. And I have another event, another type of event. If I go back to the main page where I have community events, I'm just sharing it on the calendar, and it's not managed by the PowerUp event team. It's a community event. I don't want to show all the session speakers because we don't manage that. So I don't want to have all the information about the speakers, the sponsors, all that stuff. But I want to have all the header stuff, all the main information about it. So this stuff should look familiar. I've got my image, I've got my title and subject, or sorry, the description and all that fun stuff, event details, the map and everything. That I didn't want to copy and paste that into another web template. So all I did was I have a block and extends combination here for a page template where I show, instead of all those details, I just show this one little message. And let me show you how that works real quick. I have the event details loader template. So basically what I do is, first thing I check here, a very simple template, just get the ID, that one we've seen many times, get the event details. If it's a community event, I'm going to put in the include here, wrap it up in a container, the include PowerUp events details community, otherwise include PowerUp event details. And if I look at the PowerUp event details, we were just looking at that a moment ago. And we just looked at, that's where we saw all of the includes. And let me zoom out a tiny bit. So up here at the very top, I skimmed by it really quick. This extends layout one column, which is a base template that comes with the out-of-the-box portals. But I have a block called title, and that's the very top of the page that we looked at. All the stuff we just rendered. This is how it works. This comes in from the event, and a whole bunch of there's short summary, detailed summary. That's what we were looking at in the header. Here's a parameterized template page header that I put in name. Here's the row with all the information in it. And then let me look for the end block. Lots and lots and lots of stuff going on there in the header, right? I don't want to duplicate that. I don't want to copy and paste that all over the place. And I kind of wanted the structure to remain the same as well. So I have a page template for the layout, how it's included in the containers and all that fun stuff. And then block main is where I have all the rest of a whole bunch of, you can see that another example of fetch, all the details with the event, the speakers, the sponsors, all that fun stuff happens here. And I believe it's just 2 blocks. Yep, here's the end block. So I've defined in this template block title, the layout one column. It extends that. So there's, in fact, let me just open that up real quick. Layout one column, where are you at? You are up here. This is out of the box, right? This is an out of the box template that I think I tweaked a tiny bit. So all this remains the same. If I just render this, it would render all this stuff. I've overridden the title, right, in my page template, and I've overridden main in my page template. So this is one level of inheritance, and that's why I had the loader option in there. But I had my page template event details. It's down here. First thing, it extends, and I'm overriding the title. And again, I believe I'm overriding main. Everything else remained the same. So there's an example right there. I'm just injecting my content into the layout one column structure. I go one step further. Where am I at down here? I have event details community. You see, this is really simple. So everything else remains the same, but it's a community event. Just show that little message at the bottom. Everything else at the top remains the same. All the header stuff remains the same. And it's one more level down from extends. It inherits from the event details, all that cool stuff we did up there. And I just override main to don't show all the detail. Loads a lot faster, of course, too. And then it also inherits from one level above of the layout one column, which is out of the box. So that's kind of a nice way of, like, it saved me having to copy and paste stuff all over the place, kept the layout and structure the same, and allowed me just to override one section. In this case, pretty large section, but I just override main, everything else remains the same. So that's kind of nice. I don't have to duplicate the code. I get all the stuff happening in one place. I fix it in one place. Once again, it gets fixed in all places that inherit from it. You have to keep that in mind too. You might break something downstream, but that's a really nice facility for not having to copy and paste your code all over the place. So where are we at? We're right at time. Let me go through real quick. I think I only have one or two more slides, basically pulling it all together. We have all these different tools now. We've seen, we looked at how to pull them all together into this complex page. We used liquid templates, or sorry, fetch XML. We used custom styling with Bootstrap. We used includes in a bunch of different places, block and extends for conditional layout while preserving the look and feel. And then also, in fact, I used the JSON for a calendar. So I have another JSON view for the calendar page, which you can take a look at when you get a moment. So Web Templates as a service allowed me to have one place for all the event details and serve it up in multiple different places. In fact, and I just bind it to a Bootstrap calendar that I found. So all of these different things come together into building your complex pages. There's no one way for doing things. You have lots and lots of tools in your toolbox. It really depends on your requirements. And then some additional reading. I'll leave these slides out. Victor, I'll get you a copy of the slides if I haven't already. Bunch of different places. The first thing to look at is the Liquid overview. Really, really cool stuff in there. They've done a great job updating their documentation, and Shopify will extend on what they document in Microsoft. That's the core of the language. And a bunch of different places. You might recognize the names. There's a guy named Victor there you might be familiar with. And then there's a Refresh the Cache podcast, lots of good stuff in portals. And then here's some additional slides with reference links to a lot of the things I talked about in the pages, just to go into the detail that I kind of skimmed over very quickly. So I'm 3 minutes over. So I think we're right on time because we started 3 minutes late. So
yep, we should make this like a week long presentation just because of the information that you're sharing here. Here there is quite a bit, and it's yeah, I've followed these pages before, Jim, and the documentation. I don't want to bash Microsoft too much, but the documentation is really good. You know, the Microsoft documents overall are getting better, but for portals, I really like one of the things I would say in terms of documentation, especially when it comes to Liquid development, is that Jim mentioned last week that Liquid it was a language adopted by Shopify and Microsoft. ADX Studio adopted that as the scripting language for portals. One thing that you will find, it's not a major issue, but you may find that a function that the Shopify Liquid defines or documents a certain way is not necessarily the same thing for the portal. So always compare the two. If you're doing something and then you see, for example, date formatting in Shopify Liquid, you may find that the formats that they outline there are a little different than what you see on portals. You can start on the Shopify documentation, then transition to the Microsoft documentation, and you find the right answer for portals. Okay, so that's one thing.
Well, you're right. A good example of that is the date I just ran into last week. Is in the 2-bits. It started out and they're based on Ruby, right? So a lot of the things that the Liquid language surfaces for you in the original that you'll see on Shopify is eventually implemented by the Ruby runtime. And portals and PowerApps portals, it's .NET code running under the hood. It was ported over to .liquid. So you're totally right. And dates is one that just blew up on me. Trying to get do a date conversion works completely different in Shopify than it does in .liquid.
It does.
So that's a great example. Most of the stuff works good, but you're totally right. Dates will blow up in your face. Really frustrating.
So yeah, you can use Shopify as reference, and then if for some reason it doesn't work, look for the Microsoft example, or you can start with Microsoft. The thing is, Microsoft doesn't have all of the filters, if you will, for Liquid documented, so you can use the two sites interchangeably. My hope is that as portals evolve, is that we move on from Liquid maybe into Razor. I don't know. We'll see what happens in the future, but it'd be a lot nicer if we used C# based code instead of something that I don't know much, so I'm always looking at documentation when it comes to Liquid, but that's about it. Let's see if we have questions in the chat window. Cheryl is saying, "I love that you have used your 3 minutes."
Totally took advantage. I gotta take it where you can get it, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's all right. I don't think we have any hands up, and we don't have many questions.
That's cool.
That's good. Yeah, it means that your presentation was really, really well done. So thank you very
Yeah,
much, Jim.
we'll say that.
No, it was good. It was good.
I think
I've tried to do
there's
this one time. I think I did it for the community in France last year, and I don't think I got halfway done in the full hour. So when I hit halfway through the presentation, I was like, "Oh, oops! I gotta do this again."
yeah. Well, and
Next
again,
time.
this is obviously there's 100 different ways to do things. This is just these are some things that popped up to me over the years of working on this project as well as some other work related stuff. So there's a million ways of doing things, and got some feedback. I'd love to hear. Hey, I worked with dates doing this. And you can
Uh,
see I pulled things together from lots of different community stuff. So you're totally right. There's a million ways you can go with this. It totally
yeah.
depends on what your needs are, how creative
Mhm.
you want to get with it. So there's really a lot of options out there.
We have two hands up. I did not see that on my teams, but somebody told me, so I kind of click back and forth and I see two hands. We have Mezunaf. You want to go first, and then Ramia, you can go right after him,
Yeah,
please.
yeah, thanks, Victor, and thanks, James, for a wonderful session. I however, well, what to say? My question on the web template as a service. So, what lots of feature, and I think I'll try to implement those features and other stuff. My question is there any limitations like when we for like if you are shown on the sessions and event details while you're pulling the data based on the some custom requirement. So if you have like from our tables, if you have more than 100 records while pulling the data, so do we have any limitations while mapping the data into the custom pages, or
I haven't
do we?
seen any. Yeah, I
Yeah,
haven't seen any limitations. I mean, but the scenarios I'm using aren't meant for like large scale, like integration style, right? I mean, it's mainly for I need this snippet of data that I want to use in another location. I wouldn't really. I mean, it'd be nice if you just want to serve up like a list of records that can go back and sort of like an index, like you do with an RSS feed. But in terms of like paging and all that, I'm not really sure. I think there was a similar question last time about this, and I don't know whether you'll get a paging cookie back, but I think I mentioned this last time as well. On the documentation for Microsoft, there's like some more complex examples, and there's a an example in there on how to render a grid like it would be out of the box. And I forgot. I don't know if I had a link in here. I might have a link in the documentation where it talks about how to basically it's a self-contained template that talks about how to render a grid with pagination. Check that
Mhm.
out. They might talk about it and give you some ideas on limitations for this. Personally, just haven't really run into them. Again, the use cases that I've had are I need a 30 records, and it's never come close to any kind of real limit that you would see in fetch, like 100, 500, whatever it would be. So
Yeah,
sorry,
okay.
I don't have a good answer for you on that.
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, what about caching there? Like, are we supposed to do the caching so that it ensures the usability of the record fetching from the component side web page during?
Um, the caching should be well, since the later portal, you can't do the automatic refresh of cache using code. Used to be what like a script function you can call the service. Now check out the entities you're looking at and what is it? What's the flag on the table, Victor, for um, to make sure that the cache is cleared every time it's called. It's on
So,
the
underscore service about clear cache, something that you're talking.
no, that's not accessible anymore. There's on the table. They've added a parameter on it. Well, let me just open it
Yeah,
up.
there's a parameter. I can't remember what.
Yeah, I'm
Let me
drawing a
see.
blank now. Let me pull up a solution. And there is because it used to be you could cheat on older versions of the portal. On-prem version, last on-prem version I used, there was a service we would call either through C# code or even through JavaScript, and you would hit the service. And it's now, and it uses something from SQL Server under the hood, and I can never remember what it's called now, of course. And it is change tracking. So if you
Yeah.
enable change tracking, that'll ensure that the cache is cleared every time an update is made. So if you have something that is going to be dynamic, like I add a new item to a list on a page, or if I'm going like this is where it really blew up on us in an older project was, I'm in a web form steps, add a new record, go to the next page, and it doesn't show up with a new record. Put in enable change tracking, and it should clear the cache every time there's an entry made. So that's where I would focus on the caching. If that's done, then whether it's queried from fetch or an entity list or a web page template, it should be honored if I remember right.
It is for Portal. It is. I saw a blog post as well from Colin the other day. I'll try to put it here in the chat. How you can trigger the refresh through the API.
Oh, you can still do it. Nice.
Yeah, but maybe it's old, but I need to look a bit fine.
Yeah, we definitely did it in the older version. Again, this was, I think it was still on-prem. We had it where we would do it in C# code. We had we were collecting documents from an applicant, and we'd upload. We had a record that represented a document, and then we would attach it. You'd hit next, and it wouldn't trigger these rules we had. So we were calling it through code, both in JavaScript and the next web form, as well as in a plugin every time something was uploaded. So I knew you could do it in the past, and it's the equivalent of like the UI administrative, the on the administrative screen. But I believe the enable change tracking is what you want to do for just out of the box configuration. Curious to see the post though. That'd be kind of cool if you can still do it.
Yeah. So yeah, there is. Yeah, maybe we should extend this on the next discussion. Because there is an endpoint in portals for you to retrieve settings, and it was the same endpoint that Colin was presenting on a way to trigger the cache refresh, but it would be a global cache refresh, similar to the services underscore about.
Right.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk more about it. But as far as the use of the regular refresh, it is change tracking, as Jim mentioned. Who we got here? Remia, go for it.
Hi James. Thank you so much for the quite informative session. It's useful. Actually, I'm very much new to this topic of liquid templates. I just have one query. Like, what are the key challenges usually we adopt in using this liquid template?
I guess first part is learning what the capabilities are. And again, at the time that I first started working, it's probably the reason I started, and I have a series of blog posts on it. The introduction to liquid templates, the reason I started it was, and Victor talked about it, the documentation that Microsoft offered was limited. And it makes sense. They're focused on, here's liquid for PowerApps portals, but liquid is larger than that. So they focus on what their extensions are. So learning about it is one of the first challenges you have. Second is knowing when to integrate it with a page and when not to, because the moment you start doing liquid, you're responsible for everything, right? And there are ways of aggregating page components, like you can inject a grid or an event list, that kind of fun stuff. So knowing when to draw the line, I think is one of the harder challenges I faced. So maybe take a few steps and like, hey, I want to have, always an example I always have is like, I want to render a little bit of information about the user on the page, right? And just look at, how do I do that? Because you're going to have the logged in user if they're logged in, and then gather the contact information about the logged in user and render some stuff that way and see where that's a really nice way of like, oh, I want to bold their name, or I want to go look up their parent account and see where they work. That's a nice way to start. So start with a smaller project where you can put it into a page and make it somewhat self-contained, but then learning the scope of it is learning the language, and then again deciding where and when to use it. I always find is a challenge, because he started down the path of the one page that I showed for the event and all the cards. I tried to do it out of the box with configuring a form and then putting in some other pieces, and it just looked horrible. But that's not what the form designer's meant for. So I just said, okay, forget it. Everything's going to be liquid. Then it's like, oh my gosh, how do I do this? So maybe just start small. Start with small examples. Get familiar with the documentation, some of the structures and objects that are available for you, and then go from there. But then again, I still struggle with, I could do that in Liquid, but man, I'm gonna have to maintain it, right? And I'm gonna have to build on it, and any updates I have to make, I have to do. You know, we just talked about pagination, for example, that kind of stuff. So those are the challenges that I had just getting into it and getting started with it was one of the harder things.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing I would add to it is debugging. I mean, you cannot
Oh,
compile Liquid, so it,
Mhm.
it's much like if you ever done ASP Classic. That's what you're looking at. You have to make your changes, run the page, and hope for the best.
yeah.
So that is another challenge. I think though, as the web API for portals evolves, I think a lot more people will refrain from using liquid scripting, but we'll see what happens moving
PCF
forward.
controls too.
Yeah, that
Really
too.
curious to see where PCF controls go. I think it'll replace a lot of the things you have to do out of the box and
Mhm.
give you a lot more capabilities too. And I've mucked around with it for a little bit, but I have not. I'm very much a novice when it comes to PCF controls, but I think that'll give you some of the. Just as an example, custom data entry in a form, right? There's some complex things you want to do with validation right out of the box,
Mhm.
and you have to go do some scripting and injecting it in using Liquid and putting stuff in the page. But now you can just put a component in to do some cool stuff, and it's all self-contained and much more manageable. So that I'm really curious to see where that goes too, because you're right, debugging is really painful. But now that you've got something like PCF controls and script, you can easily get in and dive into it like you would in another platform.
That's nice. We have Nor. If you wanna unmute and pose your questions, Nor.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. That was really amazing. And thank you, Victor, for arranging these sessions. Actually, I just faced this cache refresh issue very recently while I was working on some custom page with Liquid Code and Fetch XML, and I came across a very, you can say, a trick for the Fetch XML, which you can play with the created on field of an entity. You just need to create a filter and apply the lesson operator. And I'll just post the link over there if anybody having this issue. So I just wanted to
Yeah, it'd be
share.
great. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I just posted the
awesome.
link over here.
I will copy this link and check this out for sure. All right. So, Jim, your comment on PCF, it's actually a nice segue. But before I transition, I wanted to thank you once more. I was live on LinkedIn earlier today, and we talked about the events and everything that's taking place. And then took a few seconds uh, to thank folks who are doing a lot of things behind the scenes. It is a really what kind of adjective I want to use. It's a messed up season for a lot of us. I mean, we are used to present at events and get feedback, use the feedback to get better in what we do, and just to use the feedback as encouragement as well, right? Because at the end of the day, you do this, you are looking to help people, but if you don't know that you actually helping anybody, it's kind of pointless. And I know that there is a lot of folks out there who are going through this type of situation, right? Where they write articles, they present, they help folks on one-on-one basis, but they never collect feedback. So I was taking the time just to thank folks for doing what they do behind the scenes, and at least from me, what I see people do, I try to encourage them so that they can keep on going. And I want to thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for being here, helping us. I want to thank everybody. Nor, I want to thank you also for your article that you just wrote, and everybody else who is doing a little bit to make the community better. You know, at least from me, what I see, I try to respond and to encourage you to continue to do what you do. It's much appreciated. If nobody's applauding you for what you do, here's my round of applause. So thank you very much. Please continue to do and continue to help us. It's much appreciated. Thank you, Jim, and thanks
No,
everybody else who's collaborating.
well, and to you as well. Holding these sessions, it's a boatload of work, and putting this on weekly, and this is what round two for this kind of program you've been putting together. it's a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it shows. You got a really good crowd who comes in asking a lot of questions and participating. And you're totally right. When you get the feedback, whether it's a question that stumps you or if you feel like you can help somebody, it's some good stuff. So thank you for putting all this on and having me here.
Oh, thank you. So as we transition, I want to talk about really quick before we go. I know that we are way past time, but we'll just show a couple of things that will take place. So this coming Saturday, though, we have the Power Platform Dev Boot Camp, and there are lots of good sessions. And for folks who are looking into getting their PCF development skills going, I would strongly advise you to watch, first of all, the TypeScript intro by Benedict. Then there is one session following on how you can create component libraries for PCF. So those two, I would think, kind of go hand to hand. First of all, you're gonna learn the language of PCF, if you will, and then how to create component libraries. There is a session from Ivan Fico on lightning fast PCF delivery. Of course, there's the queen of PCF, Diana, and following sessions from Danesh and Scott Duro. So a lot of PCF training, and the good thing is that it goes from like level 0 to 101, and then of course Scott's presenting, so it's like godlike mode. PCF.
Say what a lineup! Holy cow!
Yeah, it's an awesome lineup. And then the following weekend, we are talking more on Power Platform backend, so ALM, API, virtual tables, so on and so forth. So there's good stuff taking place in May still. Of course, for this program, next week we're gonna have Alexander presenting. So he will present on Web API. And Alexander, he's doing a lot of stuff in the Portal world. He just released a library for Portal development for Visual Studio Code, much like what Jim is presenting, but he's using the new CLI for portals. So if you want to have a look, he has a project on, he has instructions on how to download the Visual Studio extension and how you can use it. So there is information on his website. It's really neat. It's kind of clean too. How to use the library. He's got all this stuff on his blog as well. These hidden site settings, hidden content snippets for portals, so on and so forth. So he will be presenting next week and the following week. And I think we are halfway through this session 2 of portals training. So there is quite a bit taking place still, but it will be Web API, then ALM, and then we're gonna finish off with PCF controls for portals. Either I will present, or we're talking with some Microsoft folks to present for us that last week of the program. That's June 24th. So I think that's all I had got for today. If I can get Teams back working again. Yep. And yeah, we'll end here today. Thanks again, Jim. I hope to see you soon in person.
Absolutely.
And we can catch up. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.